Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And as ever, my partner in epistemological inquiry is with me, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm doing very well. If you can explain what that very big word is, that would be really helpful, because I don't know what it means. Sounds good.
It's a great word, isn't it? And
Yeah.
It just means the philosophy of learning. That it's a philosophical term, and just quite simply, Ken, it's the study of nature, scope of knowledge, and justified belief, and it forms the basis of philosophical inquiry. So it's sometimes referred to as epistemology, the study of learning, basically, and how we do it.
I'm going to add it to my list of words to use in this coming week.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure down the supermarket they speak of little else, Ken.
Great to be here. We've got a really good episode for you this week. We're going to be starting off by examining something that I guess has been quite a hot topic again in our Facebook group, and that's assignment guidance. So Rory and I are going to be maybe going over some of the some things that you may be able to use for your counselling assignments. I know, Rory, you've got a really good topic that you're bringing today. It is one that's very dear to my heart. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be covering in theory with Rory.
Yep, we're going to be talking about the basis of Carl Rogers' work, which are conditions of worth and introjected values. And I've recorded a little story about my own experience of observing introjected values and conditions of worth. And for those of you who may be kind of not quite sure what that looks like, I've given you two case studies and discussed how the theory fits the case studies. And I enjoyed recording it, as you're going to hear.
I enjoyed listening to it as well. I had a sneak preview of it yesterday, and it's really, really good stuff. Those introjected values, those conditions of worth, are seen as what kind of takes us away from the organismic self. It's kind of where the ways of the world kind of contaminate our true being. So really interesting and great case studies there as well. I'm going to be looking at skills today, and I'm going to be focusing on focusing. See what I did there, Rory?
You did. That's the club. You're focusing on focusing.
We're going to be looking at how focusing is used in your counselling skills to kind of maybe focus down or get the client to look at a certain aspect of the material that they're bringing. But let's kick off with that assignment guidance. And I'm going to hit right over to you, Rory. And I'm going to ask you a question here on behalf of our listeners today. What is the most common reason for an assignment to be referred?
Not answering the question.
Yeah.
That's the most common one. I think what I'd like to kind of share with people, and I certainly share in my training groups, is that a lot of counselling qualifications are what's called criteria based.
Yep.
They're criteria based. In other words, unless you answer the question, doesn't matter how eloquently you write or how much other knowledge you bring in, unless the person marking it can say that's the question asked and that's the question answered, it will be referred. Let me just do an experiment, Ken.
Sure, go ahead.
What colour, because I can see Ken across the sky.
Yeah.
What colour is your T-shirt, Ken?
This T-shirt?
Yeah.
Oh, this T-shirt is a really good quality. It's made from a cloth that I believe is cotton-based. I think it's got maybe a bit of a blend of cotton and other materials. And the print, it's a transfer print. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the transfer print over there, Rory. So there you go. There's me answering the question.
Thanks, Ken. And it is a really lovely T-shirt. You may not be able to see it on the podcast, but it's a great T-shirt.
But you know what I wonder? I wonder if anybody listening to this actually knows the answer to the question that you asked, which was?
What colour is your T-shirt?
I told you all about my T-shirt. I told you a lot of really important stuff about my T-shirt that's important to me and is all true. But I guess...
Wonderful, Ken.
I didn't tell you the colour, though, did I?
No, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
When the questions, you've got to hit the criteria. And I'll let you into a little insider secret for tutors.
Here it is.
Here it is. All right,
Yeah.
so don't tell anybody. In fact, I'm going to whisper it. Okay.
Go ahead.
So, all right, you ready, Ken? So what happens at the end of every year is somebody comes from the awarding body who validates, makes sure the tutor has taught to what's being asked in the curriculum. And I'll speak louder now. And what happens is that they will say, that's the question, yeah? And then they'll point to the assignment, one of the learner's assignments that's been sampled, and they'll go, show me how that's been answered.
Yep.
And if someone's been asked what colour's the T-shirt, and as Ken so wonderfully talked about it, the quality of his T-shirt and the print, and the colour isn't in there, it doesn't get passed. And they're criteria-based assignments. So the thing to put in your mind is, what is the question? What am I being asked? Before you even start putting a fingers to keyboard or pen to paper, just sit and say, what am I being asked? And just write that down. So decode the question. Decode it. Work out what you're being asked. And once you've worked out what you're being asked, it's a whole lot easier to answer the question. And guess what, Ken?
What?
You'll pass every time you do that.
Yep. And here's the thing, from my journey as a counselling tutor, I knew my learners knew the topic and the material. It was how they were answering the question, how they were interpreting the question that was the difficulty. And it can be tricky because you can start seeing words in your assignments that are difficult to decode. Words like assess, evaluate, explain, argue, compare, contrast. It can get tricky of knowing what they're looking for when they give you those words. And it can almost seem like you have a question, you answer the question to the best of your knowledge, and then the very next question seems like they're asking exactly the same thing. And you think, but I've just answered that. But they may have been asking you in one question to evaluate and in one question to compare and contrast. So it's about being able to decode those words. And Rory took the time to write a really good book. And the book is called Getting Your Assignment in Order, Top Tips to Improve Your Counselling Assignment. It's a really good book. And this book forms part of Rory's assignment guides. On counsellingtutor.com, Rory makes counselling guides available for people that are studying counselling and psychotherapy that you can buy. And it's there to aid you with your studies. And Rory has very kindly agreed that we can give this book away with this week's podcast episode. So make sure that you go to the Counselling Tutor website. It's www.counsellingtutor.com. And that's counselling with 2 L's because we're based in the UK here, Rory and I, as you can tell from our outrageous accents, I guess. Click on the podcast tab. Go to episode 6, which is this episode, and it'll be right there at the top. And you can actually download your Getting Your Assignment in Order top tips from Rory, and it's got all those words. It's got them explained in really easy to understand information. So evaluate, make an appraisal, or the worth of something in the light of its apparent truth. Include your personal opinion, like assess. So it's kind of all broken down there. It's easy to understand, and you can have that beside you when you're trying to decode what it is that they're asking in your assignment.
Absolutely. And also there's reference to Harvard referencing. A lot of universities and colleges ask you to correctly reference anything that you've researched. So that could be web links or books. And there are standard ways of showing on your assignment where you've got that information from. And here's the thing, Ken. My students say to me, why do I have to reference? Why do I have to make these Harvard references? And I say, well, the reason for that is that when someone looks at academic work, the idea is that they should be able to look at the references, toddle off to the library or toddle off to the internet,
yep,
hit the reference that you've used, go to the page of the book you've looked at and go, yes, that's exactly what has been referenced. It shows and evidences, and here's the thing, it evidences your reading. It's the only way the tutor can evidence that you've actually read what you have, or at least open the page up. No one can evidence you've read something, but at least you've gone to the page or visited the web link. And for those of you who've gone to higher education, level 4, level 5, maybe doing degrees, it becomes so important. And if you don't do it early on, it becomes quite hard to get into the habit of it. So that's in the guide as well.
And it can be tricky. The referencing it's really easy to reference incorrectly and trip yourself up. And I know that Rory within the guide has given you the proper structure, how to reference correctly, including a little tool that you can use that'll kind of do your referencing for you, which is really handy.
Yeah, so that's quite legitimate. In fact, universities now have their own do-it-yourself reference generators on them. The University of Belfast is a really good one. If you type in Harvard and Belfast, you go to a web link and you can just literally type in all the details of your book or your web page, press a button, and it generates off a properly formatted Harvard reference for you, which is great, isn't it?
Oh, indeed. So how about time management when you are set an assignment and you have a body of work that you have to go away and do? How do you manage your time? Do you sit down and do that and eat that in one go? Or do you kind of do it as you would eat an elephant, in breaking that up and having small bits at a time? It's about, I guess, your personal style and what's going to fit your own learning style. But certainly in Rory's book, he speaks you through maybe how to manage that time, because as that deadline gets closer, that can lead to you feeling a little bit anxious. And what happens, Rory, if you sit down anxious to write your assignment? What happens in your brain?
Well, what happens is, just a little bit about brain plaster to say, is when we get, I'll give you a classic example. Have you ever gone out of the house and then can't find your keys and got stressed about it?
Oh, yeah.
And then, let me ask you, Ken, did you find your keys when you were stressed out?
No.
And the reason for that is that when we get stressed out, we pump cortisol through our system, and it switches off the big part of the brain where we remember things, and switches on the middle part of the brain, which is kind of really interested in looking for snakes, tigers, lions, that primitive part of the brain that keeps us alive. And when we're stressed out, we just don't access the higher thinking modules of our brain. So trying to write something under stress is always going to be difficult. And as I say to my learners, if you get an assignment, start making notes, start drafting it out. Because if you've got like a day before the deadline and you start doing it, you really aren't going to be giving it your best. There are some exceptions. Some people can knock out great assignments, with 30 seconds to go. But generally speaking, my experience is that you need to kind of plan it out a bit. And it can be difficult when you've got all this stuff going on.
It is, and I can really relate to that from my own experience and speaking to my learners, where they know the information, but you sit down and you see that question and all of a sudden everything seems to be gone. You just can't get it. And it's times like that Rory would suggest that you go and have a cup of tea and just relax, distance yourself from it, bring yourself back to a relaxed phase, and you'll find that the information starts coming back as your brain, higher functioning, returns back to you. So there you have it. It is assignment season, as they may say. If you've got assignments to write, you'll find this book really handy. And of course, you can get that, which is part of Rory's assignment guide. You can get that for free just by visiting this week's episode. So I guess that brings us on to theory with Rory, and something that is very dear to Rory and something that you're going to really find useful.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
A few years ago, I was sat in a supermarket cafe enjoying a pot of tea when I observed a young woman pushing a double buggy with twins about 8 months old. She stopped a few feet from me and engaged in a conversation with her friend, who was also shopping. "Oh, these two," she remarked, before pointing at one of the children, stating, "This is the good one." She then pointed to the second child and said, "And this is the naughty one." Both children reacted to the tone of Mum's voice. The good one laughed a little, the bad one frowned. Through the intervening years, I wondered who the children had grown up to be, and if they had consistently received the same messages, what effect would it have had on them, both emotionally and mentally? Conditions of worth are messages we take on board about what we have to do to be valued. Conditions of worth are, and can be, very subtle. Nevertheless, this subtlety is all the more powerful, since it can render us unaware of what our conditions of worth are. Each of us, I suspect, have our own conditions of worth. So let me ask you this question. How would you complete the following sentence? Just quickly say what comes to mind. If I'm to be of value, I must. What did you think? Work hard, please others, never cry, don't get angry, never let others see weakness, do as you are told, be strong, be clever, be silent, be small, be the best. Do these sound familiar? What I've described is conditional love, the idea that a person is only valued if they behave or act in a certain way, even if it is contrary to how they feel. How about big boys don't cry, giving the message that men are not allowed to feel pain or make expressions of being hurt or display vulnerability? Rogers stated the need for self-regard or approval is enormous. Children are influenced by their parents and society and strive for approval by doing things to please them, which make them feel more loved or valued. However, if their behaviour does not meet with their expectations or approval, they feel less loved. They may then experience incongruence between self and experience, and this may lead to psychological maladjustment, hindering personal growth towards self-actualization. The process of clients moving away from operating on conditions of worth and toward their true self includes moving away from facades, from oughts, from pleasing others, and moving towards self-direction, openness to experience, a greater trust in self, and a greater respect for and understanding of others. Let me give you 2 examples from my practice experience. And yes, I've changed some of the details to protect confidentiality. I once worked with a woman who loved reading and studying for qualifications. However, her family put a lot of stock in going out, drinking, and of all things, karaoke. They thought her love of learning was a bit weird, and as such, they mocked her for it. Under these conditions of worth, she struggled emotionally. On one hand, trying to please her family, while on the other, trying to realise her goals in life. This is sometimes known as incongruence, trying to be everything to everybody and ultimately not being true to your real self. The second client was a man who as a child was encouraged by his mother to lie to his father. The reason for this was his father had his own mental health difficulties, which manifested in him going into rages and breaking things if he did not hear what he wanted to hear, hence the lies. As he got older, he found it difficult to tell the truth, and this had an impact on how honest he was in relationships. Part of him wanted to tell the truth, however, the introjected values and conditions of worth he had taken from his childhood made it almost impossible for him to be truthful. In both these cases, the work revolved around unconditional positive regard, allowing both these clients to explore who they wish to become and helping them recognise that this was okay. In this environment, where judgment was suspended, clients were able to slowly trust their organismic or real self. In the case of the woman, well, she decided to return to college and study a course to change her career. The male client slowly learned to tell more truth, even though the consequences may be that the truth caused conflict, something the lies had helped him avoid for so many years. In both cases, my clients found their true selves. The people around them had to get used to a new set of attitudes, and in my male client's case, the father got to hear some home truths, with the emphasis, I suspect, on truth. A final thought. Rogers, who came from an agricultural background, had cause to go in the basement of his house, where potatoes were stacked in a bin. He noticed that one of the potatoes was sprouting. Its small shoot was growing towards the tiny window in the basement. From this, he concluded that every living thing had the capacity to grow, even if, like the potato, the circumstances were impoverished. Rogers believed that if the therapist offered the soil of a different kind, the client would be able to, like the potato, grow and flourish. What do you say? The nutrients in that emotional soil? Why, of course, the core conditions.
I can certainly recognize my own introjected values there, my own, I guess, conditions of worth as I was listening to that, Rory. And that story of the two children and the good one and the naughty one. Oh, that brought some stuff up for me. But it's so true. It's so true how we labeled in life. And when you have that label, how difficult it is to shake it off, because your introjected values become the truth that you look at the world through. Really, really good theory.
Absolutely, Ken. And just remember that some introjected values can be quite useful for us. Things like don't drink bleach, don't put your fingers in electric sockets, look both ways before we cross the road. They're quite positive messages to receive, and that children really need to hear, I think. But it's amazing just how much negative stuff can just be interpreted. It doesn't necessarily have to be delivered negatively. It's how it's interpreted, and it's all in how we interpret the messages we get through our lives. Yeah. So, Ken, what are you going to be doing in skills today?
Today, focusing down on focusing. So basically taking maybe a lump of material that a client may bring and maybe inviting them to look at where we feel that the feelings may be.
Oh, that sounds great, Ken, and such an important skill, because sometimes clients come with such a jumble of material right at the first session, that rehearsed material where they're literally telling you everything, and a real good skill to try to, I guess, get the counsellor and the client to work on the most important stuff first. I'm not giving it away, have I, Ken?
Counselling Skills with Ken Kelly.
Today I'd like to explore the skill of focusing. So, to start off with, focusing, I've found, is sometimes misunderstood as a word, and I guess for good reason, because if we think about focusing, we may be drawn to thinking that it's about us paying more attention and really focusing our concentration on something that the client is bringing. And it's not this at all. Focusing is listening to what the client is bringing, and then taking the material that they've brought and choosing an area to actually focus down on, to push the rest of it aside, and to maybe concentrate or to lead or invite the client to explore more the area where we feel that the focus should be. So where do we look to focus? If a client is bringing a pile of material, where should we be looking to focus that kind of client's attention? Well, one of the places we might look is if the client brings a feeling word. So the way that the counselling process often works is that the client will come in and they will have a story, or they will have the narrative that they bring into the session. And there's an element of safety in that narrative, although they will be bringing the weight of the material that they have to bring and share with you. There is also a safety in staying in the story and staying in the narrative and telling you what happened, because there's a distance between the narrative, the story, and the actual feelings that underlie that. And some of the feelings that clients are bringing are really painful. That's our work as counsellors, is to be there in those painful feelings with people. But if it's so painful to go into those feelings, then it feels safer for me to stay in the narrative and to tell you all about it and to tell you the story and to tell you what happened. So very often, a focus, maybe a focus on a feeling that is underlying the story or words that the client is bringing. So, okay, there's an example of what we might look at as a focus, and that's just one, and we'll cover another in a moment. But how do we then focus down on that? Do we kind of stop them and say, whoa, let's talk about that over there? Because specifically, my approach to counselling is the person-centered approach to counselling. So it is, by its nature, non-directive. There are different approaches where maybe you will be more directive and you will be more solution-based and you will maybe directively focus down on something. But if we're looking at person-centered counselling, how might we invite, I guess is a better word, the client to explore something? Well, first of all, we need to be in their frame of reference. The client is bringing their material, they're bringing their story. Maybe they will touch on a feeling word as they're going through that story. And as the person-centered counsellor, I might just use a really simple reflection of the feeling word that they brought. And that is kind of me acknowledging that that feeling is there. And it is an invite for the client, should they choose to and should they feel ready, to go to that feeling and to focus on it, to drill down, to bring more of themselves and that feeling. So I just want to pick up an example from our simulated skills session. You're going to basically hear me coming in first. The client has brought some material. I use a focusing technique to look at going through to the feeling and look at how this impacts in this relationship. But when it comes to making that choice of doing something for self, you use the word selfish.
Very much so. It feels, when it is for my own gain or my own wants and my own pleasing, I guess, it really feels selfish.
So in this example, the word was selfish, and that was the focus word. And the reason for that, the material was brought, the story was brought. But when this client said the word selfish, it didn't seem to fit with them. They didn't seem to resonate with selfishness. It seemed to be a pain area. So I purposely reflected that word back. It was their word that they brought, and it was an invite to focus down on what is selfish mean to you. Is this selfish? And it allowed the client to go and explore that. So there is an example of kind of focusing down maybe on a feeling that is underlying what the client is bringing. Here's a great tip for you. The clients very often bring you clues on where the feelings lie, because they may be bringing a whole pile of material, and then they say, and for me it feels like, and they will say what it feels like, maybe a very small word for that feeling. For me, that feels like great difficulty. And then they may carry on with a narrative. When the client says it feels like, or uses the word feel, or I feel, or it makes me feel, that's a great place to go back and focus down on, because you're focusing down exactly where they're telling you the feeling is. They're taking a flag and they're bashing it into the material that they're bringing, and they're saying, look, there's a feeling that lives under here. So that's a great place to go and focus down on. And it may well be that the client chooses not to take that invite and not to go and look at that feeling right now. And that's okay. At least you have acknowledged it by focusing, and lets that client know that they've been understood. Another place where we can use focusing, and this is not necessarily going into a negative feeling, is if there has been a moment of movement within the counselling session. So if the client has experienced some development, some kind of growth, no matter how small that is, the place where we work as counsellors, the pain that we work in, very often the tiniest little steps forward, the tiniest moment of movement for that client is a massive win. So let's celebrate that. We're not just there to dig in and find pain and take the clients to the places that are uncomfortable for them. We can also focus on something that the client maybe feels is a small moment of movement, and we can acknowledge that and say, yes, wow, look at that. So I have an example of that to share with you now.
Not assume what the other person would like or need or want from that, but to allow for them to maybe express that, bring what it is that I would do, and maybe not be so sensitive that if it maybe is not taken up or maybe not accepted, and to allow for whatever the situation is that occurs, that it's not a rejection of me, it's
not a rejection of me.
Yeah, it's just a choice or a decision or a like or a want or a whatever, but it's not ultimately rejecting me.
Wow.
Just the thought or
that feels massive. That really feels massive when you say not a rejection of me, because mere moments ago you were talking about that as being a rejection. It feels like, looking at it and examining it, you may be able to see that slightly different now. You're acknowledging that not as a rejection of you, and I guess as maybe their opinion, want or need. But at the same time, I recognize how fragile that want and need of self is, feeling that it does take second place. So I guess it's about maybe that courage to bring your wants and needs out measured against it's not a rejection of me.
Yeah. It doesn't feel as make or break or life and death anymore. The idea of me purely expressing something that I'd rather prefer is not the ultimate, this is going to be you liking me or not liking me. It's purely a thought or an idea.
Just those words that it's not so life and death anymore. Hearing the client say that just warms me. It's kind of it's just amazing, and it's what counselling is all about. It's a massive moment of movement. Only moments before, the client was speaking about how she felt judged and evaluated by other people when she was making decisions for herself. And now, thanks to a little focus on that moment of movement, it doesn't feel like that anymore for her. She's able to see that there is a change. So we've focused down on that moment of movement. So focusing is a skill. It is so very useful, and it is so very necessary in what we do as counsellors. I challenge you to practice focusing. You can use all different techniques to focus. You can use a one-word reflection. You can use a paraphrase to bring an invite to focus down on something. You can share what it feels like for you to invite somebody to focus down on something. It is useful. It allows the client to, if they wish to, go and explore deeper, and it deepens the bond. It takes it to a new relational depth, I guess. So hopefully you'll go out there and look at the skill of focusing with new focus.
Well, Ken, that is just a really, really good explanation of the skill of focusing. And what I would say is that there are lots of different sorts of therapy which use the same words.
Yep.
So it's not to be confused with focusing technique that's done by a guy called Gelding, who was one of Roger's students, which is another version of person-centered therapy. So just to be clear, the skill of focusing is exactly what you've been speaking about trying to remove the clutter, trying to find which are the most important things for the client to discuss. And there is a technique called focusing, which is a whole therapeutic idea in itself. And I think that's really important to make the distinction between.
Definitely. And it's interesting that in therapy there are many words which are similar or may mean slightly different things according to different models and different approaches. And it's about us being able to kind of hear the word and know the context of it, I guess.
Absolutely, Ken. So we're going to move in to Ask Ken and Rory. And yes, we've found quite an interesting Ask Ken and Rory, haven't we?
We have, and I guess for some of you, it may be that you have either just been on or are planning on going on your residential. And today's question really focuses down on personal development. So it's really a snippet that was taken from a post by Caroline Harris, who was responding to someone else. And the question that I'm going to take from that is, how do trainee counsellors self-measure their own self-awareness throughout their training? I thought that was a really interesting question. Rory and I kind of had a look at that together, and it's something we might like to discuss today.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting question in general, isn't it? How do we change? Because that's what we're talking about, the process of us changing. And Rogers called it he wrote a book called On Becoming a Person. Yep. This idea that it's a journey of self-growth and not a destination. And I think that we measure our journey from where we started. If you're going to measure anything, you measure from the point that you started, when you went on the journey of self-discovery. And I think it's about maybe how you're responding to people around you, those people close around you who may be projecting introjected values and conditions of worth. How do you respond to them? Are you different with them? Have you had to renegotiate relationships? I know I had to renegotiate relationships as I came through my training. Things that, I kind of agreed with and went along with were no longer acceptable as I came to the end of my training, and that's been a pattern of renegotiation ever since. What do you reckon, Ken?
Yeah, very, very much so. I remember sitting on one of the first lessons as a learner when you were lecturing, Rory, And I remember you saying that this counselling course comes with a health warning. And it was and the warning was that you may experience change, and that change that you experience as part of that growth may have, I guess, ramifications on your life as you know it at the moment, on the relationships that you're in at the moment. And I certainly saw that around me with my peers, and I've certainly seen that with my own learners as well. As people grow, they change, and the people around you don't always change at the same rate. If they're not on the same course, how can they? They're not looking where you are looking. You're looking into self. So that I remember as being quite significant. And I guess there's two kinds of changes that I recognize. There's those lightning bolt changes where you go, wow, I get it now. It's like everything has come together. It's like an epiphany when all the information suddenly kind of stacks up, and there's a magical, significant change that happens within a moment. But there's also what Rogers refers to as moments of movement, which are tiny little changes. And those tiny little changes, they add up. And they create, I guess, a different way that you react with the world. But you may not be so aware of the tiny little changes, but they're just as important as those monumental lightning bolt changes.
Absolutely, Ken. And a really good exercise is the Johari window exercise.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Using that. And what we might do is we might put a link to Johari window in the notes. I made a video on the Johari window, so I'll put a video on it. But basically, one of the ways to gain some self-awareness is to sit in front of one of your peers, and just to ask your peer this simple question: how do you experience me? And let them speak about how they experience you. And it may be the things they are telling you that you were not aware of.
Yep.
Now, you can agree with them or you could disagree with them. That's fine. It doesn't mean because they're saying it that it's the truth, because as we know, there's no absolute truths in the phenomenological field. It's all our perception. But it may be worth just doing that exercise, those things that other people can see but aren't available to you. It's very valuable. I do it in my lessons all the time, and it always has a bit of a wow factor.
Yeah, and that keys right into the Johari's window that you're talking about there, Rory, because it's unseen to self, seen by others. That's what we're looking at there. It's in that third pane of the window. The fourth one is unseen to self, unseen by others. That's stuff that is not even on the edge of awareness. But there are sometimes things that people see in us that we don't see in ourselves. Often, how often have you, listening to this, looked at a colleague, a friend, a loved one, and seen parts of them that they're not aware of? And very often we won't verbalize that. It's for them to find it. But asking that question and being open, I guess, being open to what answer may come back from your peer of what do you see when you see me? And, you know, when I did that exercise, the thing I struggled with the most was the positive feedback. I was okay with the negative. It was, oh, yeah, no, I see that. And the more negative sides of my personality, okay, great, I can work on that. But I felt really uncomfortable when people were saying nice things about me. And that was part of me coming to terms with my, I guess, inacceptance within myself to accept praise and positive feedback.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll go on in a podcast in the future to talk about attachment style, maybe.
I rub my hands together. I love attachment style. It's really, really interesting. And I remember when I started studying it, how much I learned about myself, really. And you know, that's what self-development is about. How do you measure it? It's difficult. There isn't a meter that you can kind of plug in, but how do you interact with other people? How are your tolerance levels to people who may have opinions, thoughts, feelings that differ from your own? Are you more accepting of that? If you look at the 7 stages of process that Rogers outlines, where do you see yourself within the 7 stages of process? Now, incidentally, this I think is really interesting. Look at the 7 stages of process. You can find it online. You can also find the 7 stages of process at counsellingtutor.com. We've got it on our website. Just do a search for it. 7 stages of process. Check where you think you are within the 7 stages of process. Then sit down and ask a peer where they think you are in the 7 stages of process and see if it matches. And if it doesn't, maybe something to go and process on.
Absolutely. And recently in a class exercise, we were doing some work around Joe Harvey window, and I said, there was an unequal amount of students. So I said, well, someone worked with me, and I said, how do you experience me? And they said, do you know, Rory, you seem to drink a lot of tea. Who would have known?
No, I would never have thought of that.
It was an eye-opener to me. Yeah.
And on that tea drinking note, I think it's time for me to go and get myself a cup of tea as well, Rory. Hopefully you found this episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast interesting and useful for you. I know that I just love being here with you guys and sharing it. We love your comments. We love your feedback. We've got over 25-star reviews on iTunes, and we are so very grateful. If you spend a little of your time to go onto iTunes to leave us that review, we're just so thankful for that.
Absolutely. We're very, very grateful for all the support and confidence in what we're doing. And it's just great to just see the comments in the Facebook feed and the reviews on iTunes. So to wrap this podcast up, as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.